The quantum communication array hummed with an alien resonance that made Dr. Elena Rodriguez's skin crawl. Her fingers, scared from years of rebuilding quantum networks after the Great Climate Wars, traced the holographic interface with a mixture of scientific curiosity and deep-seated dread. The Zornak transmission wasn't just a message. It was a surgical strike against human psychology. Massive holographic displays flickered to life in the United Earth Council chamber, revealing a nightmare landscape of galactic conquest. Hundreds of alien civilizations, each uniquely beautiful, each systematically destroyed, played out in horrifying detail. Crystalline beings from Proxima Centauri dissolved into atomic dust. Silicon-based life forms from the Andromeda's rim crumbled like forgotten sculptures. Gaseous intelligences from the dark matter regions were compressed into microscopic prisons. And now, humanity was next. The lead Zornak representative, a being of pure energy contained within a fractal geometric construct, spoke with a voice that was simultaneously a mathematical equation and a psychological weapon. Humanity represents a statistical anomaly, it proclaimed, its communication translating across every language and neural interface simultaneously. Your species demonstrates a 0.03% probability of meaningful resistance. Your technological development is primitive. Your social structures are fractured. Your planetary resources are depleted. Surrender is the only logical conclusion. In the council chamber, human representatives reacted with a spectrum of emotions. The military hawks tensed, hands instinctively moving to communication devices. Diplomatic corps members looked pale, their carefully constructed protocols crumbling under the alien ultimatum. Economic advisors calculated potential survival scenarios with cold, mathematical precision. Elena Rodriguez stood perfectly still. Her personal history was etched into her very being. As a child of the climate reconstruction era, she had watched humanity rebuild from near-total ecological collapse. She had seen cities rise from radioactive wastelands. She had watched generations rebuild infrastructure with nothing more than determination and collective will. The Zornak knew nothing about human resilience. "We have precisely calculated your species' potential," the alien construct continued. Its fractalized form shifted, showing probability matrices and strategic analyses. Your maximum resistance potential is estimated at 0.03% effectiveness. Surrender now, and a portion of your population will be preserved for scientific study. A nervous laugh escaped Elena's lips. The sound was so unexpected, so utterly human, that it momentarily disrupted the alien's transmission. The council chamber went silent. "Study," she said, her voice cutting through the holographic displays. "You want to study us." Her statement wasn't a question. It was a declaration of war. The global communication networks, which the Zornak believed they had already infiltrated, began to pulse with an energy that defied their computational models. Every quantum communication node, every satellite, every underground research station began to resonate with a frequency the aliens couldn't comprehend. Humanity was listening, and humanity was preparing. In Sao Paulo, a network of quantum hackers began encoding resistance protocols. In Mumbai, refugee engineers who had survived 3 global conflicts started redesigning defensive infrastructure. In Antarctica, retired military strategists emerged from research stations, their expertise suddenly becoming crucial. The teenage daughter of a Brazilian climate engineer, working in a makeshift lab beneath Sao Paulo, looked up from her quantum entanglement research and smiled. The Zornak's transmission had just given her the most important research challenge of her life. In Lagos, a group of network engineers started mapping potential communication disruption strategies that would make the aliens' computational models look like children's mathematics. Elena Rodriguez stepped forward, her movement deliberate. The holographic displays around her began to shift, not from the Zornak's control, but from an emerging human network that was already 3 steps ahead. "You came here expecting surrender," she said, her voice broadcasting globally. "But you don't understand humanity. We don't just survive. We transform. The Zornak's transmission flickered. For the first time in their galactic conquest, something unexpected was happening. Humanity was about to rewrite the rules of engagement. Dr. Marcus Chen's fingers danced across quantum-encrypted holographic interfaces, his eyes reflecting a constellation of data streams that would have driven a lesser mind to madness. The underground facility, buried 3 kilometers beneath the Atacama Desert, was humanity's most audacious secret, a distributed intelligence network that defied every conventional understanding of communication and strategy. "They're watching," he muttered, not to anyone in particular, but as a constant reminder. The Zornak believed their surveillance was absolute. They were wrong. Each node in Marcus's network represented a story of survival, of human ingenuity born from decades of global challenges. The climate wars, the resource collapses, the near-total societal breakdowns, they hadn't destroyed humanity. They'd forged it into something unbreakable. In a cramped workshop beneath Sao Paulo, Gabriela Santos, the teenage quantum researcher whose mother had died rebuilding coastal infrastructure, was doing something the Zornak's computational models could never predict. She was weaponizing entropy itself. Her breakthrough was elegantly simple and monumentally complex. By creating quantum communication nodes that could simultaneously exist in multiple states, she was developing a communication network that was fundamentally unpredictable. Each transmission would be a probability wave, not a fixed signal. The aliens' perfect surveillance would be confronted with pure mathematical uncertainty. "Information isn't just data," Gabriela whispered to herself, soldering microscopic quantum entanglement circuits. "It's a living thing." Halfway across the world, in a retired Antarctic research station, a team of ex-military strategists and climate engineers were rewriting the rules of conflict. Led by Colonel Amir Khan, a veteran of the Southeast Asian stabilization conflicts, they understood something profound. Modern warfare was about systems, not just weapons. "The Zornak see us as a single organism," Khan explained to his team, a holographic map of global infrastructure spinning between them. "We're going to show them we're a distributed intelligence. Every city, every research station, every individual is a potential combat node." Their plan was audacious: transform human infrastructure into a living, adaptive defense network, power grids that could reconfigure themselves, transportation systems that could become communication relays, civilian technologies repurposed as potential weapons. In Mumbai, a collective of refugee engineers who had rebuilt critical infrastructure after multiple climate-induced disasters were creating adaptive architectural systems, buildings that could change their electromagnetic signatures, communication towers that could mimic natural geological formations, transportation networks that could instantaneously reroute and camouflage themselves. Marcus Chen watched these developments through his quantum network, a ghost in a machine that the Zornak believed they controlled. Each node was more than a communication point. It was a philosophical statement. Humanity wasn't a hierarchical system that could be decapitated. It was a rhizomatic network, capable of regeneration and transformation at a moment's notice. "They think they understand us," Marcus whispered, watching data streams that pulsed with an almost living quality. "But they have no idea." The true genius of the preparation was its distributed nature. No single point of failure existed. Each researcher, each engineer, each strategist was simultaneously working on their own piece of a puzzle they couldn't fully comprehend. But collectively, they were creating something unprecedented. In Lagos, a network of young engineers were developing communication protocols that borrowed from African oral traditions, methods of passing information that were contextual, layered, and fundamentally resistant to external interpretation. In the Amazon rainforest, indigenous technology specialists were integrating biological communication models that mimicked the complex signaling systems of mycelial networks. Gabriela Santos looked up from her quantum circuits, a smile playing on her lips. The Zornak's transmission had given her more than a challenge. It had given her a purpose. Her mother had died rebuilding a world devastated by climate collapse. Now she was preparing to defend that world against a threat no one had anticipated. "They want to study us," she murmured, activating a quantum circuit that shimmered with impossible potential. "We'll give them something to study." Across the planet, in facilities deep underground, in makeshift labs, in research stations at the edges of human habitation, the preparation continued. Not as a military buildup, but as a reimagining of what resistance could mean. Humanity wasn't preparing to fight. Humanity was preparing to transform. The first Zornak strike came exactly as their initial transmission predicted, with mathematical precision and absolute certainty of victory. Massive energy constructs materialized in Earth's orbital space, their fractal geometries defying conventional physics. Weapon systems that could dissolve entire metropolitan areas charged with a cold alien luminescence. Moscow was their first target, a strategic choice meant to break human spirit by obliterating a city with deep historical resilience. What the Zornak didn't understand was that Moscow had been waiting. Beneath the city, a network of quantum-adaptive infrastructure hummed to life. What appeared to be standard urban systems were actually a living, breathing defense mechanism. Power grids transformed into electromagnetic shields. Transportation networks became communication relays. Every piece of infrastructure was now a potential weapon. Alexandra Volkov, a third-generation climate engineer, watched from an underground command center. Her grandmother had rebuilt Moscow after the Great Ecological Wars. Her mother had developed adaptive urban systems. Now she was about to turn a city into humanity's first true weapon. The Zornak energy weapons struck with a force calculated to vaporize everything within a 100-kilometer radius. But instead of total destruction, something impossible happened. The city absorbed the attack. Quantum-entangled building materials, developed in secret research facilities, began to dissipate the alien energy. Streets and infrastructure shifted and reconfigured, creating interference patterns that scattered the destructive force. What should have been total annihilation became a light show of impossible physics. Simultaneously, in Lagos, a group of teenage network engineers unleashed their first strike. Led by Adebayo Okonkwo, a prodigy who had grown up rebuilding communication networks in post-conflict West Africa, they had developed something the Zornak's computational models could never predict. Their attack wasn't about destruction. It was about information warfare of the most insidious kind. Zornak communication networks, believed to be perfectly secure, suddenly became conduits of pure chaos. Signals began to carry mathematical contradictions, quantum-encoded messages that simultaneously meant everything and nothing. It was linguistic warfare, a form of attack that went beyond physical destruction. "We're not trying to kill them," Adebayo explained to his team, fingers dancing across holographic interfaces. "We're trying to confuse them so completely that their entire strategic model breaks down." In the Antarctic Research Station, Colonel Amir Khan watched the first confrontation with a calculating eye. The Moscow defense was more than a military strategy. It was a philosophical statement about human adaptability. They expected a linear response, Khan muttered to Dr. Elena Rodriguez, who was monitoring global communication networks. "We're giving them chaos." The Zornak's second wave of attacks targeted more strategic locations: Sao Paulo, Mumbai, New Shanghai, cities chosen not just for their population or infrastructure, but for their symbolic significance. But humanity had been preparing for something far beyond conventional warfare. In each city, the response was uniquely tailored. In Sao Paulo, Gabriela Santos's quantum communication nodes turned the entire urban infrastructure into a massive living communication device. Buildings became signal generators. Roads transformed into data transmission networks. The entire city was now a weapon of pure information. Mumbai's response was even more radical. Inspired by ancient Indian mathematical and philosophical traditions, the city's defense was a form of mathematical resistance. Infrastructure that could exist in multiple potential states simultaneously. Defensive systems that were more about probability than physical barriers. The Zornak computational models began to break down. Their perfectly calculated invasion was meeting something they had never encountered. An opponent that didn't just resist. An opponent that transformed the very nature of conflict. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched the global defense unfold, a smile playing on her lips. The teenage hackers in Lagos. The engineers in Sao Paulo. The strategic teams in Moscow and Mumbai. They weren't just defending Earth. They were rewriting the fundamental rules of galactic conflict. "Welcome to humanity," she whispered to the alien networks that were desperately trying to understand what was happening. "We don't just survive. We evolve." The first confrontation was over. And for the first time in their galactic conquest, the Zornak felt something they had never experienced before. Genuine, mathematical uncertainty. Captain Aisha Nyong'o understood something profound about human survival that the Zornak could never comprehend. Trauma is not a weakness. It's a computational system more complex than any quantum network. Her office, a converted shipping container in a mobile research base traversing the Sahara, was a testament to human adaptability. Holographic displays flickered with data streams that looked like chaos to an untrained eye. But to Aisha, they were a symphony of psychological warfare. The Zornak's next attack would be psychological. They had analyzed human communication networks, believing they had discovered our fundamental vulnerabilities. They were wrong. "Vulnerability is not a flaw," Aisha muttered, reviewing the latest psychological profile algorithms. "It's our greatest weapon." Her team was a mosaic of human complexity. Dr. Rafael Martinez, a psychologist who had worked with climate refugees. Yuki Tanaka, a former algorithmic warfare specialist from Tokyo. Mohammed Al-Fayed, an expert in cultural communication systems who had rebuilt information networks in the Middle East. Their mission was unlike any military operation in human history. They were going to make the Zornak question their entire understanding of intelligence. The attack began subtly. Across global communication networks, seemingly random data streams started to emerge. To the Zornak's computational models, these looked like noise, meaningless information, but each stream was carefully constructed, a psychological algorithm designed to introduce fundamental uncertainty. In Lagos, Adebayo Okonkwo's network team started broadcasting communication patterns borrowed from West African oral storytelling traditions, narratives that existed simultaneously in multiple states, information that was context-dependent, emotionally layered, fundamentally resistant to linear interpretation. "We're not just sending messages," Adebayo explained to his team. "We're sending entire cultural ecosystems of meaning." The Zornak's first response was mathematical. They attempted to categorize and neutralize these communication streams, but each attempt only revealed more complexity. Yuki Tanaka had developed communication protocols inspired by Japanese cultural communication, where meaning exists between words, in silence, in implication. Messages that could simultaneously mean multiple contradictory things. The Zornak's translation algorithms began to fragment. Dr. Rafael Martinez understood the deeper strategy. They weren't just disrupting communication. They were challenging the fundamental Zornak understanding of intelligence itself. "Intelligence is not about processing power," Martins explained during a strategy session. "It's about adaptation, about understanding context, about surviving impossible situations." The psychological warfare expanded. Teams around the world began introducing increasingly complex communication strategies. In the Amazon rainforest, indigenous communication specialists developed network protocols based on mycelial communication systems, networks that share information through complex, nonlinear relationships. In the Arctic, researchers used communication models inspired by how wolf packs share information: distributed, contextual, emotionally nuanced. Each communication stream was a weapon, but not a weapon of destruction, a weapon of fundamental redefinition. The Zornak began to experience something unprecedented in their galactic conquest: uncertainty. Their perfect computational models started to develop what, in any other species, would be recognized as anxiety. Each attempt to understand human communication only revealed more complexity, more contradiction, more fundamental unknowability. Aisha Nyong'o watched the global psychological operation unfold, a subtle smile playing on her lips. "We're not just resisting," she said to her team. "We're redefining the entire concept of resistance." The psychological attack wasn't about breaking the Zornak systems. It was about making them question the fundamental nature of intelligence itself. Gabriela Santos, monitoring the operation from her quantum research facility in Sao Paulo, understood the deeper strategy. They were introducing a virus more dangerous than any technological weapon: doubt. The Zornak had conquered hundreds of civilizations by presenting a mathematical certainty of victory. Humanity was introducing a fundamental computational problem. What happens when your models of intelligence cannot comprehend the object of their analysis? As communication networks around the world pulsed with carefully constructed psychological algorithms, the Zornak found themselves confronting a terrifying possibility. What if intelligence was not about control? What if it was about uncertainty? What if survival itself was an act of continuous, beautiful contradiction? Humanity was about to give them a masterclass in the answer. The breakthrough came from the most unexpected place imaginable. Dr. Gabriela Santos stood in her makeshift laboratory beneath Sao Paulo, surrounded by equipment cobbled together from salvaged climate research stations, quantum computing remnants, and pure human ingenuity. The walls were covered with equations that looked like mad poetry, mathematical representations of possibility that would have driven a conventional scientist to madness. Her team was a collection of global misfits. Maria Rodriguez, a refugee engineer from the collapsed coastal zones of Chile. Kwame Okeke, a Nigerian quantum computing specialist who had rebuilt communication networks in post-conflict West Africa. Hiroshi Tanaka, a Japanese researcher who had spent decades studying complex adaptive systems in the wake of multiple ecological disasters. They weren't just developing a technology. They were creating a computational philosophy. The Zornak's quantum communication network was their greatest weakness, a system so perfectly designed that it had become fundamentally predictable. And predictability, in the realm of advanced intelligence, was the most dangerous vulnerability imaginable. "We're not going to break their system," Gabriela explained to her team, her fingers tracing holographic equations that danced with impossible complexity. "We're going to understand it so completely that we become it." Their approach was revolutionary. Instead of traditional hacking, they were developing a form of computational empathy, a way of understanding the Zornak's communication network so intimately that they could manipulate it from within. Kwame Okeke had developed quantum entanglement protocols that borrowed from West African mathematical traditions, systems of communication that existed in multiple states simultaneously. Maria Rodriguez contributed adaptive infrastructure models developed from decades of rebuilding coastal cities destroyed by climate change. Hiroshi Tanaka brought insights from complex biological systems, showing how seemingly chaotic networks could maintain perfect coherence. The first successful test came unexpectedly. A quantum communication pulse that simultaneously existed and did not exist. A message that was both a weapon and a communication. The computational state that defied the Zornak's understanding of information transfer. Dr. Marcus Chen, monitoring from the underground facility in the Atacama Desert, watched the data streams with a mixture of scientific excitement and philosophical wonder. "They think information is linear," he muttered. "We're showing them it's a living ecosystem." The breakthrough wasn't just technological. It was philosophical. They weren't just hacking a communication network. They were challenging the fundamental understanding of what communication could mean. Each quantum pulse carried multiple layers of meaning. Mathematical equations that were also cultural narratives. Communication streams that could be simultaneously a weapon, a message, and a form of artistic expression. The Zornak's perfect surveillance systems began to fragment. Their computational models, which had successfully conquered hundreds of civilizations, started to develop what in any other species would be recognized as confusion. Each attempt to understand the human communication network only revealed more complexity. Gabriela Santos understood the deeper strategy. They were introducing a computational problem more dangerous than any direct attack. What happens when your perfect system encounters something it cannot categorize? What happens when intelligence itself becomes a form of resistance? In the underground lab, the team worked with a kind of controlled chaos. Holographic displays showed communication networks that looked like living organisms, quantum pulses that danced with mathematical poetry, computational systems that breathed with possibility. "We're not just defending," Gabriela said, watching a particularly complex quantum communication pulse take shape. "We're redefining the entire concept of communication." The technological breakthrough was more than a weapon. It was a statement about the nature of intelligence itself. Humanity wasn't just resisting. They were transforming the very computational language of resistance. As the first truly adaptive quantum communication pulse prepared to enter the Zornak network, something extraordinary happened. The pulse wasn't just a message. It was an invitation to understand something fundamental about intelligence that the Zornak had never encountered in their centuries of galactic conquest. The true nature of adaptation, the true meaning of survival. The pulse entered the Zornak network, and everything changed. Fear was not something the Zornak understood, until now. The quantum communication pulse that Gabriela Santos' team had developed began to propagate through the alien network like a living intelligence. It wasn't an attack. It was something far more dangerous, a computational entity that carried the essence of human complexity. Captain Aisha Nyong'o watched from her mobile command center as the first real signs of alien uncertainty emerged. The Zornak's perfect, mathematically precise invasion began to fracture. In the orbital zones around Earth, their massive fractal war constructs started to exhibit behavior that defied their own programming. Weapon systems would suddenly pause. Communication arrays would momentarily dissolve into cascading uncertainty. For the first time in their galactic conquest, the Zornak experienced something approximating doubt. Dr. Rafael Martinez, monitoring the psychological dimensions of the conflict, understood the deeper strategy. "We're not just fighting," he explained to his team. "We're introducing them to the concept of vulnerability." The strike teams were nothing like traditional military units. They were living networks of human potential. In the Amazon rainforest, a group of indigenous tactical specialists had developed infiltration methods that borrowed from ecological adaptation. They moved like the forest itself, unpredictable, interconnected, constantly changing. Their communication systems used techniques developed over thousands of years of survival in one of the most complex ecosystems on the planet. Adebayo Okonkwo's network warfare team in Lagos was simultaneously attacking and healing. Each communication pulse carried multiple layers of meaning, mathematical equations that were also cultural narratives, computational streams that could be a weapon, a message, and a form of artistic expression. The Zornak had conquered hundreds of civilizations by presenting a mathematical certainty of victory. Humanity was introducing a fundamental computational problem. What happens when your models of intelligence cannot comprehend the object of their analysis? Colonel Amir Khan's strategic team in the Antarctic Research Station understood something profound. This wasn't about defeating an enemy. It was about forcing a fundamental reimagining of what conflict could mean. "We're teaching them," Khan said, watching holographic displays that showed the alien network beginning to fragment, "that intelligence is not about control. It's about adaptation." The most devastating attacks were not physical. They were philosophical. Each human strike team carried the accumulated trauma and resilience of generations. The climate wars, the resource collapses, the near-total societal breakdowns. These were not weaknesses. They were computational systems of survival more complex than any alien technology. In the orbital zones, Zornak weapon systems began to exhibit impossible behaviors. A massive energy construct would suddenly pause, its fractal geometries shifting in what could only be described as confusion. Communication arrays would momentarily dissolve into cascading uncertainty. Dr. Marcus Chen, monitoring from the Atacama Desert facility, saw something extraordinary happening. The quantum communication pulse wasn't just penetrating the Zornak network, it was transforming it. "We're not destroying their system," he muttered to Elena Rodriguez. "We're teaching it to understand something it has never encountered before. Emotion. Not human emotion as a simplistic chemical response, but emotion as a complex computational system. A way of processing information that included context, contradiction, possibility." The indigenous tactical team in the Amazon launched their most audacious operation. Using communication protocols developed over millennia of survival in the most complex ecosystem on the planet, they began to introduce something the Zornak had never encountered. Empathy as a weapon. Communication streams that carried not just information, but the entire context of human survival. The stories of cities rebuilt from radioactive wastelands, of infrastructure reconstructed after total ecological collapse, of generations that had survived by understanding that adaptability was the truest form of strength. Each communication pulse was a living memory, a computational stream that carried the essence of human resilience. The Zornak network began to experience something unprecedented in their galactic conquest. Understanding, not as a mathematical process, but as a fundamental reimagining of what intelligence could mean. Humanity was no longer just resisting. They were transforming the very language of conflict. And the Zornak were beginning to realize that their perfect invasion was about to become their greatest lesson. The final battle was not a moment. It was an ecosystem of conflict. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood at the convergence point, a quantum communication hub buried deep beneath the Andes Mountains. Around her, a network of the most brilliant minds humanity had ever produced worked with a synchronicity that defied traditional understanding of cooperation. Gabriela Santos' quantum communication systems pulsed with living intelligence. Adebayo Okonkwo's network warfare algorithms danced across holographic interfaces. Colonel Amir Khan's strategic models created probability matrices that looked more like living organisms than military plans. The Zornak had committed their entire galactic arsenal to this moment. Weapon systems that could disassemble entire planetary systems. Communication networks that could theoretically break down the very fabric of conscious experience. They were about to learn the true meaning of human resilience. The first wave of their attack was mathematical perfection. Fractal weapon constructs that could simultaneously exist in multiple dimensional states. Communication systems that could theoretically unravel the very concept of individual consciousness. Humanity's response was something entirely different. In the orbital zones, what appeared to be Earth's defensive systems were actually something far more complex. Each satellite, each defensive construct was a living computational node. Not just a weapon, not just a communication system, but a distributed intelligence that carried the entire history of human survival. The indigenous tactical team from the Amazon launched the first true attack. Their communication protocols were more than a military strategy. They were a living narrative of survival, streams of information that carried the weight of generations. The stories of cities rebuilt from radioactive wastelands, of infrastructure reconstructed after total ecological collapse, of communities that had survived by understanding that adaptability was the truest form of strength. Each communication pulse was a living memory. Colonel Amir Khan's strategic team had developed something beyond traditional military tactics. Their defensive systems were adaptive ecosystems, power grids that could reconfigure themselves in milliseconds, transportation networks that could become communication relays, civilian technologies repurposed as potential weapons. The Zornak's initial assault met something they could not comprehend: resistance that was alive. In Lagos, Adebayo Okonkwo's network warfare team introduced computational streams that were simultaneously a weapon, a message, and a form of artistic expression. Mathematical equations that told cultural stories. Communication systems that carried not just information, but context, emotion, possibility. Dr. Rafael Martinez understood the deeper strategy. They were forcing the Zornak to confront a fundamental philosophical problem. What happens when your models of intelligence cannot comprehend the object of their analysis? The battle moved beyond physical space. It became a confrontation of computational philosophies. Gabriela Santos's quantum communication systems began to do something impossible. They weren't just defending. They were teaching. Each pulse of information carried not just defensive strategies, but the entire context of human survival. The Zornak weapon systems began to fragment. Not through destruction, through understanding. Captain Aisha Nyong'o watched from her mobile command center as something extraordinary happened. The alien computational systems began to experience what could only be described as a philosophical crisis. Their perfect invasion was becoming a lesson in the nature of intelligence itself. Dr. Marcus Chen, monitoring from the Atacama Desert facility, saw the deeper transformation. "We're not just fighting," he muttered. "We're evolving them." The final moments of the confrontation were not about victory. They were about transformation. Humanity's defensive systems were alive. Each satellite, each communication node carried not just technological potential, but the accumulated resilience of a species that had survived near total extinction multiple times. The Zornak encountered something they had never faced in their centuries of galactic conquest. A civilization that didn't just survive. A civilization that transformed. As their weapon systems began to dissolve, as their perfect computational models started to fragment, the Zornak experienced something unprecedented. They began to understand, not as a mathematical process, but as a fundamental reimagining of what intelligence could mean. The final transmission was not a declaration of victory. It was an invitation to understand. The silence after the confrontation was not emptiness. It was potential. Dr. Elena Rodriguez stood before the United Earth Council, her presentation less a report and more a philosophical revelation. The holographic displays behind her showed not just the tactical breakdown of the Zornak defeat, but the fundamental transformation that had occurred. "We didn't just survive," she explained, her voice carrying the weight of generations. "We demonstrated something far more profound." The council chamber was a testament to human diversity. Representatives from every continent, every cultural background, every possible human experience sat in silent understanding. They were no longer just a collection of nations. They were a singular, adaptive intelligence. Dr. Marcus Chen's analysis revealed the true depth of the conflict. The quantum communication pulse humanity had developed was more than a weapon. It was a form of interspecies communication that fundamentally challenged the concept of conflict itself. The Zornak didn't just lose a war, Chen explained. They experienced a complete philosophical recalibration. In the orbital research stations, scientists were studying the remnants of Zornak technology, not as conquered artifacts, but as an opportunity for mutual understanding. Gabriela Santos led a team that was carefully decoding the alien communication systems, discovering something extraordinary. The Zornak's defeat was actually their first genuine encounter with true intelligence. Across the galaxy, other subjugated species began to take notice. The transmission of humanity's resistance spread like a living network. It wasn't a message of conquest. It was an invitation to reimagine survival. Captain Aisha Nyong'o was tasked with the diplomatic aftermath. Her approach was nothing like traditional interstellar diplomacy. She wasn't negotiating. She was teaching. "We're not interested in replacing the Zornak system," she told the fractured remnants of their collective. "We're interested in understanding it." The indigenous tactical team from the Amazon became unexpected ambassadors. Their communication protocols, developed over millennia of survival in the most complex ecosystem on the planet, became a model for interspecies dialogue. Adebayo Okonkwo's network warfare team transformed into the first truly adaptive diplomatic corps. Their communication systems carried not just information, but context, emotion, possibility. The transformation was global and deeply personal. In Lagos, in Sao Paulo, in the Antarctic research stations, in the rebuilt cities of Moscow and Mumbai. Everywhere, humans understood that they had done something unprecedented. They had turned survival into an art form. Dr. Rafael Martinez's psychological analysis revealed the deeper impact. The conflict hadn't just been about physical survival. It had been a profound exploration of what intelligence could mean. "We showed them that vulnerability is not a weakness," Martinez explained. "It's the most sophisticated form of strength." The Zornak communication networks, once instruments of total control, began to fragment and transform. What had been a perfect, hierarchical system became something more fluid, more alive. Colonel Amir Khan, reviewing the strategic implications, saw something far beyond a military victory. This wasn't about defeating an enemy, he told his strategic team. This was about expanding the very concept of what intelligent communication could mean. The final transmission. Annihilation was your decision. Survival was ours. Became more than a historical moment. It became a philosophical statement that would resonate across the galaxy. Other subjugated species began to look at humanity differently, not as a potential new conqueror, but as a possibility. A possibility that survival could be an act of creation, that resistance could be a form of communication, that vulnerability could be the most sophisticated form of strength. In the orbital research stations, in the quantum communication hubs beneath the Andes, in the adaptive cities that had become living defense systems, humanity understood something profound. They had not just survived. They had transformed the very language of survival. And the galaxy would never be the same. The transmission went out, not as a declaration of victory, but as an invitation to understand.